What's up, everybody? How's it going? Cheers from Carpo Land. This is my backyard. When I stepped outside, my usual vape, coffee, evening thing. It's about 6:30 p.m. I love my evening coffee. It's just like such a special thing to me. I'd never give it up. On today's agenda, I'd like to talk a little bit about something that I've been discussing lately, but haven't really pinned it down as far as I wanted to. And that's about, just to be blunt, to make it a catch-all type phrase, science versus spirituality, if you will. That I realize that in folks' minds, this is something that's going on, this good and evil battle, or the religion and science battle, or any of these various battles that are going on in people's minds. And I say in people's minds because how we perceive the world is up to us. And something that always comes up when a person has a belief that is challenged is that they tend to dispute science by saying that science is always out trying to spoil other things. In other words, I feel like a lot of folks have a negative view of science because it ruins all the fun, so to speak. Now, I subscribe to this sometimes. There are times when scientists just want to, they refuse to look. There's so much confirmation bias in science. And there are studies done that seem to be very convincing, but they weren't done as double-blind studies. And the more we understand about how studies are conducted and how the scientific method is properly done, the more we can discount some of the, quote, pseudoscience that people use and try to pass off as fact. Now, I've been trapped. I've fallen victim to these things, which is why I'm talking about it. I've fallen victim to many different ideas about frequency, vibration, matter, into this spirit science, and listening to people talk about what we used to be like as humans before we had our falling millions of years ago, and then that we're in this other cycle, and there's several different ways of seeing life in general, but the spiritual realm is something that's invisible, so it's easy to make up any story about it. So we create these, quote, layers of reality. We talk about dimensions, we talk about beings and aliens and all these alternate realities, and I even subscribe to some of that to an extent. For example, yesterday my mom and I were talking about the viewpoints of how we see the world, and how different people view the world, and I was asking, do you believe that thoughts have weight? And the reason why is because I've been trying to see the future as something positive, and this thought occurred to me that what if I'm sitting with a person talking and they view the world as thinking that there's going to be a nuclear war, let's say, and I think that the future we're all going to come together and create an atmosphere of conducive to living as humans the way we want to. Very well, what if my reality and their reality at that point do split off? What if the multi-dimensional or the multi-reality theory is correct in that you really do create your reality? It's just that you don't see it until you've manufactured it. That you could branch off from that reality. In other words, you're driving. I'm totally reaching on that. It's just an idea, but it was just a funny thought that occurred to me. And I realized that if you're going to bring up something that's maybe psychic or spiritual in nature, you better have evidence, or else people are going to bash you for not having the proper defense or the proper papers, if you will. And I think that is important. And I can't blame science for wanting to dispel some of the negative myths of the past. And it's like I was watching I was inspired to make this after I watched a James Randi. I don't know if you know who he is, but I've seen a few documentaries about him. But I watched one just earlier that he did himself, and it was really good. It had a lot of repeat stories I've already heard about guys like Uri Geller, various psychics and spoon benders and whatnot that have all been proven by Randi to be basically frauds to an extent. It's like he says, he'll still be challenged, but as to say, hey, that doesn't mean that all people who do this are not telling the truth. And he says that's correct. It doesn't mean that. It just means that sometimes the most likely explanation is the right one. And most often, the simplest explanation is the right one. I mean, people bending spoons, that's an old trick. But there are folks who still believe it. There are people who still believe that Uri Geller was really doing the tricks he was claiming to do. And very well, maybe he had some psychic powers, and many of these people might. But if you really look at what they call these studies, or these scientific studies supposedly done on these, psychics, they're often more wrong than right. And in the studies where they've been proven to be right, they're not double-blind studies, or there very well may be some transfer of information. And we have faith healers out there, okay? Some of this stuff I'm saying sounds very obvious to a lot of you, but there are a lot of people who still believe in this shit, such as faith healing. And these people who do it, such as, what was his name, Papa, back in the 80s, who, they found out, he was actually exposed by James Randi. James Randi was a magician, and then he went on to go on to expose other illusionists who were passing off their skills as being true. So he has nothing wrong with magic or illusions as long as you're labeling it as such. But if you're falsely packaging it and selling it, which a lot of these guys have done, and people fall for it, then he called them out, and that's what he was doing to several different people. And it's fascinating to see how people will defend themselves after they have a bad reading or whatnot. One thing he did was, this was pretty revealing. He had a class of like 20 or 30 college students, and he said that each one of them had a specific, they were all given an envelope, and in the envelope was a horoscope that was supposed to be done for their specific birth date and time and place. And all of them read their own horoscopes, and then he asked them to rate between 1 and 5 how accurate it was. 1, nobody raised their hand. 2, nobody raised their hand. 3, nobody raised their hand. 4, half the people raised their hand, and 5, the other half raised their hand. Actually more on the 5 side. And then he had everybody pass it to the person behind them, and come to find out that they're all the same horoscope. And this should show that there's a little bit to be said about cold reading, or just knowing people. Some of the faith healers, they would have you fill out, like Popov, he would have people fill out prayer cards before the sermon. And then during the sermon, his wife would call and talk into his earpiece and recite off the people's names and things about their life they'd put on there, so he could appear to just be getting God's word. And here are millions of people falling for this crap, and it's sad, but at the same time, here's the other angle to it. And a person may say, if you believe it's real and it makes you feel good, then what's wrong with it? I would say nothing. I would say as long as you're not spending money on it, as long as you're not paying to go see the person, and some people might say, well, it's okay to pay for something, but, this guy was multi-millionaire. I mean, a lot of these guys are. It's just crazy that the human mind is so easily warped by what we want to believe and what we want to think. We are pattern-seeking creatures. It's helped us to survive for our entire history. And now here we are, and we can't apply some of these tools anymore. We have to reapply our pattern thinking to a world that may not fit into the patterns that we wish it would. And so to kind of summarize here, I want to believe. It's like the poster that Mulder had on his wall in X-Files. I want to believe. I've always wanted to believe in ghosts, UFOs, reincarnation, aliens, everything that I've heard that's of the alternate source, whether it be cryptozoology or otherwise. I've been fascinated by it, and I've spent the last 20 years looking into so many cases of alien abduction / government conspiracy and every angle of alternate news. Basically all the weird, anything that would have been hidden or hard to find or hard to discover or mystical, I was totally into, and I was immersed in it for years. And in the end, I stepped back and I asked myself, what good has it brought me? And this brought me to that, when I was watching the Randy thing earlier, he said, there's nothing wrong with believing in something greater, and, if you want to believe in psychics, and some psychics may be real, but he says, in all the history, he says all the good things around him that make life awesome to live have been brought to us by science. What has psychic prediction ever brought to our world? And that's a big question, honestly, and I'm not comparing psychics and science, that's a bad comparison. What I'm saying is that all the alternative media, alternative news, slash, whether it be positive or negative, it could be alien related or, anything mystical, what has it brought to the world? Well, it's brought art, it's brought music, it's brought inspiration. That's what the mystical side brings. And that's something that's often overlooked. That art doesn't come from rigid, rational thinking. It's something that comes from the heart. So, I guess I just realized that myself. Hold on a second, I have to appease something. What's up, buddy? You stuck? The joys of parenting. So, what I wanted to say was that I want to believe in something interesting, I want to believe in something greater. And then I have my rational mind also on the side that's telling me, hey, it's not about fooling yourself. Like, you can't fool yourself at a point. If you're a thinker, if you're the kind of person who thinks like I do, and I know there's a lot of you out there, you just can't bullshit yourself. A lot of people say, well, once you're awakened, you can't go back to sleep, and sometimes they're talking about waking up to their spiritual natures or whatnot. And often I just kind of think you're still asleep because you think that it's something outside of you. It's all internal. All the power that we have comes from within. If we want to look without, if we want to ask for help, that's fine. But the only thing that's going to change our lives is knowing ourselves. And we externalize our fears, and we externalize, many of the mysteries by, and something that really, that's really revealing is how harsh many scientific-minded people are to spiritual people. They are so rude and belligerent and just, you're just a dumbass, oh, you're still believing in fairy tales, and they'll compare it to everything. And when I hear the rebuttal argument from the other side, it would be something along the lines of, oh, you're so rigid in your scientific thinking that you can't come out of your box and see the world for what it, that there's something greater and mystical. And both of them are right and wrong, but in the same sense, it's like, grab both sides and hang on. You know what I mean? You take a little bit from whatever works for you. You can't deny that the scientific mind has brought many awesome things to our world. You have to look at repeating a process over and over. If you just did an experiment one time and it worked, and you use that as your basis for truth, then we'd have nuclear reactors blowing up all over the place and bridges falling apart. This is why tests are done. This is why stress tests are done on materials, and why there's repeated tests done to see if something is efficient. Because we as humans realize that the world around us is not reliable. But there are certain aspects of it that are reliable. Just knowing that if you walk up and grab a rock and pick it up, it's probably going to weigh like what you think. If you grab a fistful of dirt, it's probably going to, pulverize like you think. I mean, a lot of people talk about how nothing is real until you see it. Nothing is real until you look at it. And there's this whole new mystical side put on that. And to me, that goes nowhere either. It doesn't matter if the whole world's an illusion. It doesn't matter if we're an illusion. It doesn't matter if Descartes was right, and I think, therefore I am, and that's all there is. It seems like too much thinking is not good for us. Too much philosophy tends to be bad for the mind, and that's something I've come to after too much philosophy. So I've eased up in the last year or so and really been able to laugh at myself and some of the beliefs I've had that I really wanted to hold dear in my heart, but darn it, science ruined it for me. You know what I mean? And I thank science for that. I thank science, but I don't think, I'm not saying that I've taken a side. That's not my point, because I don't. I made that pretty clear. I take science and take your spiritual nature and run with it and do whatever you can, and fuck the rest of the people. fuck the rest of the people who tell you negative anyway. Those who are trying to tell you that your way's not working, or that you shouldn't be believing this or thinking that. If anyone ever tells you what you should or shouldn't believe, it just means that deep down inside they don't know what the hell they're going to believe. Or that they're so damn pious that, I think that even some of the people that are the most pious don't even know if they really believe what they do. Because I feel like some of the points that are defended the strongest are either the ones that are the most important or the ones that are the least important, but the individual wants to believe it so bad. So, if you want to kind of get a further idea of what I'm talking about, check out James Randi, R-A-N-D-I. You can just Google it. I think there's a YouTube documentary on there, and then there's one on Netflix too. I think it was. It was years back I watched it, but he's a funny guy. He's very clear-headed. He speaks from the heart, and you can see that he means what he says. And there's very few people like that. Sometimes people will say, like I had a discussion the other day where I was dissing on David Icke with somebody who doesn't follow him, but just was watching him, and I was like, I'm sorry, but I can't watch the guy, even though some of the stuff he says may be truth. A lot of the stuff he says to me sounds like bullshit. But more importantly, I don't like the way he conveys his message or his demeanor. And I know that may sound shallow to some people, but it's very important that you believe the person you're looking at, and you believe that they're really true to what they're saying. And not just that they believe it, because people will believe anything. And a lot of people who say bullshit are believing what they're saying. But when there's guys like Joseph Campbell, who was a very collected man and very easy to hear and listen to. And that's how I feel about James Randi, because he's he's revealed a lot of bullshit that people might not want to hear. But so if you don't want to hear it, if you don't want to have your heart broken, and you believe something that then don't look into it. But if you do, then look into it and deal with the pain and anguish of being wrong.